Okay guys, we've got a piece of interior trim to repair today. It's out of a Land Rover Freelander, and a common thing, somebody's stuck some air fresheners to it or some kind of aftermarket merch. Looks like they've used super glue and all sorts on it. Unfortunately that isn't coming off, so we're going to have to repair and spray it. So we've got, nearly as always, a 120 grit, 180, 320, 400. So that's going to be removing the damage out. And then down here, there's different types, slightly different with your sanding pads and sandpapers. These are little foam back ones, which is a little bit more professional trade stuff that you buy in a big roll, but it's exactly the same as this 800. That's 800, that's 800. I like using these, but I'm using this stuff every day, but you're perfectly fine just using normal sandpaper, and this is wet and dry stuff as well. So then we've got scotch. There's usually just use either grey scotch or red scotch, and that's for keying up the panel ready for paint applications. There's a little 400, same as the foam back 800. So that's it really. That should be everything sanding wise and abrasive wise to repair this, remove that, bring it back, scotch key up the whole thing, and then ready for some primer. So this is the paint application lineup we're going to use today. It's all going to be done by our rattle can. I probably would have used my compressor and spray gun system if I was doing it myself, but keeping the video completely DIY, off the stuff that you can buy online or at your local paint factors. So we've got the primer. I use this stuff anyway. Technically any primer should do. I like this stuff, but you know, there's plenty of others out there. I just went to a well-known place called Halfords in the UK just to pick up some paint. I tried to match it as best I could to the panel. If you're spraying interior trim, obviously make sure it doesn't say metallic on the can. Finally, I want to try and replicate the matte finish. It's not shiny, so but I do want to protect it with some kind of lacquer, clear coat. So I've gone for this Pro XL Pro Matte Lacquer. So we'll see how we get on with that. Okay then, we'll start with some 180. We'll step it up to 120. So that's all the adhesive that the whatever it was is stuck down to removed. As you can see, it's left all scratch marks from the 120, and this is what I was talking about earlier. If you just put primer straight over that, then you're still going to see the scratch marks. You've got to work up the grades. So next I'm going to just rub that down and then we'll have a look. So there we have both areas of damage removed with the 120 grit. So as you can see, it's left quite a rough finish, which I was expecting obviously. So now we're going to drop back onto the 180 and we're going to start to feather out the rough marks we've left with the 120. And this is all that the process is about when you're sanding, is to work your way back up the grades, removing each section of scratches that you've left with the previous grit. So it's looking smoother already, but it's still not really there where we need it to be for the primer stage. Certainly not for any paint applications. Some more industrial primers would probably cover the scratch marks we've left for the 180, but we're going to use 320 grit and we're going to work it back up. So I went over it with the 320 and now I've just got the 400 out and I'm just giving the whole thing a good keel. I'm going to primer the whole thing. I may just mask off this grill here just in case I don't want any primer to sit in the holes. Primer's quite thick and I think it'd look rubbish if some of these holes were filled with primer. So I'm probably going to mask that bit off. Once you've gone over it all with 400, you can use a bit of 800. Like I said before, you can use the wet and dry. Just as a bit of a key up, make sure you get all the little edges down the sides. So you can see where the adhesive residue was. We sanded it with 120, 180, 320, 400 and it's looking pretty good already. So definitely ready for some primer. As with any painting, it's always a good idea to use some kind of panel wipe or degreaser to make sure your panel's clean. This just obviously ensures that the panel is clean and it stops any kind of reactions happening down the line. There's nothing worse than applying your paint and trying to do everything right only to find that the paint all reacts because a bit of a lack of cleaning and prep prior to painting. So that's looking pretty good already. And at this stage you could probably just put some colour on it now, but just for the video's sake I'm gonna use some of the primer just in case you've had to repair a crack on it or you've had to put a bit of filler in it or you've modified it in some way. I'll just go through the primer stage as well, just for the tutorial process really. So we'll do that next. So particularly this time of year where it's cold, you need to be heating up your aerosol cans, else it won't flow very well and it'll probably end up spitting and looking a mess. Now I'm using a heat gun. You can use a hairdryer, or you can put it in some hot water in a bucket and leave it for a bit. Anything you need to do, give it a good shake, especially if it's a new can, and it all helps the overall finish. As with any aerosol, just give it a quick spray to make sure everything's spraying accordingly, the nozzle's fine. So we're just going to give it its first coat of primer. Don't put it on too heavy. We're not aiming for full coverage. We're just going to get the first coat on. I'm just going to help that on along a little bit with the heat gun. Not too much. I'm just wafting it around. Just getting a little bit of heat around the area. Okay, I'm just going to leave that for a few minutes and let that dry. Okay, so I've let that dry for about, I think it was about 5 or 10 minutes. It's completely dry anyway. Touch dry, definitely. So I'm just going to give it another coat, second coat. So I can go on a bit heavier with this coat. Just going to stand it up a little bit. Just get down the edges. So that's been drying for about 15 minutes. I don't know if you can see, it's some sun coming in here. It's quite sunny outside even though it's winter. So yeah, that's ready for some sanding now. So as we said before, there's different types of sandpaper. Now we're getting to the more fine grade stuff. So the higher the grit, the finer the grade. So we're starting to get down to more of the finishing sandpapers now, what we can apply the paint applications to. So I've just grabbed some 800 here. It doesn't matter if you use the normal stuff or the foam back. If it's people at home, probably the normal stuff's more accessible. So we're just literally going to sand down any little imperfections that are in the primer. Not pressing too hard. We're just after a nice flat, smooth finish. Make sure you get all the sides. But we don't want to be sanding through the primer, else that defeats the point of the primer process if the plastic underneath is going to show. And if it's something that's been painted before and it's the previous paint job that's showing through, that could cause reactions when we start applying some paint onto it. So it's quite important to sand it flat, but try and not sand through the edges. So some paint applications can be sprayed on top of 800. Because we're using a rattle can finish today, I'm going to use 1000. So it's the same kind of thing again. I've got some foam back stuff, but you can use wet and dry. And you can at this stage use the wet sandpaper on this panel. Just remember to make sure it's completely dry before the next stage. So as you can see, if you can see that, that's been nicely flattered down with the 800 followed by 1000. It's looking nice and smooth, there's no bits in it, there's no textured or orange peel finish, it's nice and flat, nice and even. So I've just took the masking tape off this bit, but I'm going to mask this bit back up. I'm just a little bit concerned that we're going to get like a build-up of paint if I keep trying to paint. Obviously the bit that we've primed is going to need a good 3 coats on there to cover it, whereas I think we might get away with just a bit of a dusting over this bit, just to stop any of this clogging up with paint. It might not do that, but it might, so I'm just going to take the time just to mask that bit off. Okay, so we've sanded all the damage out, we've primed it, we've let it dry. I've just panel wiped it with some rag just to make sure it's completely clean, and it's looking good. So we're ready for some colour. Now the cool thing about this stage now is you can pretty much spray this however you want. It can be black, green, a luminous orange, whatever colour you want. It can be matte, satin, gloss, it could be textured, it can be smooth. It would be the same process up to this point. So if you want bright pink trims in your car, glossy, then that's exactly how you can spray it now, and you do exactly the same as everything that I've just done now. Even regardless of whether it had damage or not, this would be the same kind of prep work that would be needed. So this one, I'm going to try and keep it as original as possible. I didn't have a lot of time to get the right colour, but I just picked up some colour from a local store. It's Rover Tempest Grey. It just looked about the same as the trim that, you know, out of the car. It's non-metallic, a lot of them with metallic, and we don't want it metallic, so we'll see how this goes on. Obviously I've heated it up, I've been shaking it for a good while now, so we're just going to put the first coat on, which is going to be a really light coat. Don't put it on too heavy, that's when problems happen, okay? I've also masked this back up, as I mentioned before. I'll take it off when we perhaps get to second or third coat, and then I'll just give it a dusting over with the rattle can. Okay, that's the first coat, so I'm going to leave that now. It says on the back of the can to leave it for 15 minutes, so I'm going to have a look at it after about 10 minutes and see where we're at. Okay, I'm back now after 10-15 minutes, and we're going to give it another coat now. Slightly heavier coat, but not too heavy. Make sure you get the underneath. Okay, that's the second coat done. Exactly the same again. We're just going to leave it now for a few minutes and we'll get back to the third coat. Okay, so if at any stage of the colour application, the base coat, you know, you find any bits in there that you're not happy with, you can just give it a quick, very light flat down with some 1000, just to take any little nibs out and just to flatten the surface. If there aren't any there and you're happy with it, don't bother, but it's just a little tip. If you do get a piece in it at this point, it's not the end of the world. Okay, so this is ready for the third coat. So this time I'm going to spray over the grill as well, and make it all uniform and all matched now. So that's all been sprayed, the colour coat, and dried. It's had 3 coats, nice thin even coats, which has covered all the primer. We've gone over the grill with 1 coat, so it's looking pretty decent. So what I'm going to do now is apply some lacquer. This is a matte lacquer, so non-shiny, and it just says apply in cross coats from distance of 250 ml. Obviously shake the can. Drying time 30 to 60 minutes. Can be dried under infrared. Can be mechanically polished after 24 hours. And that's it basically. So this is just going to protect it. Obviously it's an interior panel, so you know there's going to be things brushing past it. It's going to need to have a little bit of wear and tear in it. It's going to be probably cleaned in the future and stuff like that. So definitely always a good idea to put some kind of finishing coat on top of it. You could leave it as it is, but we'll do this. So it's just flashing off now, and what you'll probably find with matte and satin finishes is, whether it's an aerosol or if it's applied by a spray gun setup, you'll find that they'll go on shiny, but as they dry and the solvents evaporate, they should start to dull down and start to leave that kind of finish that you're after. So this one's literally just been sprayed 2 seconds ago, so it's still a little bit shiny, but I can see as it's flashing off now, it's starting to dull off and dry its natural finish in a few places. So there we have it, the finished result, and I'm pretty happy with it. I'm pretty chuffed actually with that. I think it looks very factory, which is what I wanted. It's got the exact kind of sheen that it had before. That's where the sticky pads were. Like I mentioned before, you could have painted that any single colour you wanted, or after the primer stage, or you know, you could have texture repaired it or gloss. satin. Obviously now it's got the durability as well that you're going to need in the interior, so it can be cleaned. And yeah. So there we have it, guys. I hope you like that tutorial. Nice simple one. And keep an eye out for the next one.